Los Angeles International Airport was as busy as ever. People rushed around, rolling their suitcases, talking to each other, and making their way to their flights. Amid the chaos, one man stood in the first-class line. He seemed completely different from everyone else. His name was Ibrahim Traoré. He wore a simple plaid shirt, worn-out jeans, and scuffed boots. His backpack looked like it had traveled with him all over the world. There was nothing flashy about him at all. Most people didn't notice him at first, blending into the crowd. But there was something about him that stood out, something that made him feel different. He didn't seem bothered by the chaos around him. While everyone else looked rushed and stressed, Ibrahim remained calm. His face was relaxed, and his eyes looked peaceful. It was as if he didn't let the busy world around him affect him at all. Behind him in line was Victor Harding, who was the complete opposite. He wore an expensive suit, shiny shoes, and a strong cologne that made sure everyone knew he was important. His every move seemed designed to show off his wealth. When he looked at Ibrahim, a small smirk appeared on his face. He couldn't resist making a comment. "First class, huh?" Victor said with a mocking smile. "You never know who might show up here these days." Ibrahim turned slightly to look at him, still calm. "Yes, the world is full of surprises," he replied, his voice steady. Victor expected a bigger reaction, something that would confirm his belief that Ibrahim didn't belong in first class. But Ibrahim didn't bite. He simply kept his expression unchanged and said nothing more. Victor, feeling like he wasn't getting the attention he wanted, pushed harder. "Look, nothing personal," he said, his tone still dripping with sarcasm. "But you don't exactly look like someone who flies first class." Ibrahim looked at him for a brief moment and then replied, "I believe we all have our place, and sometimes it's exactly where we are." Victor didn't know how to respond to that. He wasn't used to people brushing off his comments so easily. He thought for a moment, but didn't press further. The line started moving forward, and the two of them walked toward the plane. Ibrahim walked slowly, calmly, as if the rush around him didn't matter. Victor, however, walked quickly, his steps purposeful, showing off his confidence. When they reached the plane, the unexpected happened. Ibrahim headed straight to the first-class seat next to Victor. Victor checked his ticket twice, unsure if he was seeing things. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, surprised. Ibrahim simply sat down beside him with a quiet smile. "Looks like we're traveling together," he said politely. Victor, still thrown off by the situation, crossed his arms and leaned back in his seat. He couldn't quite explain why, but Ibrahim's calmness made him feel uncomfortable. There was something about Ibrahim that didn't fit the image Victor had in his mind. It was unsettling. As more passengers boarded, Victor decided to start a conversation, but it wasn't going to be a friendly one. "So, what do you do for a living?" he asked, his voice casual, but with a hidden judgment. Ibrahim adjusted his bag and looked up. "I work in leadership and community building," he said simply. Victor raised an eyebrow, surprised by the answer. "Oh, I see," he said. "So, you're one of those motivational speakers or something?" Ibrahim smiled a little and shook his head. "Not quite," he replied. Victor, however, wasn't ready to let it go. He leaned in a little and continued. "You know, sometimes people sit in first class, not because they deserve it, but because they got lucky," Victor said, his voice sharp. Ibrahim didn't answer with words. Instead, he gave Victor a steady look, his calm demeanor not changing. It was a look that seemed to say everything without saying a word. Victor, caught off guard, quickly realized Ibrahim wasn't going to react the way he expected. The plane had lifted off, and as the cabin settled into a gentle rhythm, the atmosphere in first class remained unusually tense. The flight attendants walked through the aisles, offering drinks, but there was a noticeable undercurrent of discomfort between the two men sitting next to each other. Ibrahim, still calm and collected, took a moment to adjust his backpack under the seat in front of him. He looked out the window, seemingly lost in thought, while Victor, his fellow first-class passenger, kept fidgeting in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. Victor, unable to let go of his need to assert himself, seized the moment when the flight attendants passed by. He leaned forward, making sure his voice carried just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "A glass of champagne, please," he said, flashing his usual confident smile. His tone was arrogant, as though the champagne was his way of announcing that he belonged in first class, that he deserved to be there. The flight attendant nodded with professional politeness and handed him the drink. Victor, satisfied with his little display, settled back into his seat with a smug expression. Ibrahim, however, did not seem to notice or care. When the flight attendant reached his seat, He asked for a much simpler request. "Just water, please," he said quietly. Victor, already irritated by Ibrahim's unbothered attitude, could not resist another comment. He glanced at Ibrahim, shaking his head slightly. "Water? You're flying first class and you're going to have water?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Some people don't know how to appreciate the experience." Ibrahim took the water bottle from the flight attendant, a soft smile crossing his lips as he met Victor's gaze for a moment. "I'm fine with this," he said simply. "Sometimes simplicity is enough." Victor let out a short laugh, not letting go of his sense of superiority. "I guess that's true for some people," he muttered, his voice carrying just a hint of disdain. "People who don't expect much, I guess." Ibrahim took a sip from his water bottle, his expression calm and unflinching. "Maybe the best is different for everyone," he said, almost to himself as he returned his attention to the window. Victor, who had expected more of a reaction, now found himself in uncharted waters. The conversation wasn't going the way he had anticipated. Ibrahim wasn't getting defensive, wasn't trying to prove anything. Instead, he was calmly accepting the situation, making Victor's own attempts to assert control seem childish in comparison. Victor tried to recover. His eyes narrowed slightly as he leaned forward, looking at Ibrahim more directly. "Not everyone gets to experience the best life has to offer," he said, his voice more serious now as if he were trying to drive home a point. "Some people are just lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time." Ibrahim, who had been quietly observing the world outside, shifted his gaze back to Victor, locking eyes with him for a moment. There was something unshakable in his calmness. "I think we all have our place," Ibrahim said simply, "and sometimes it's exactly where we are." Victor's expression faltered for a brief moment. He hadn't expected that response. He expected the man beside him to apologize, to admit that he didn't belong, to apologize for his apparent lack of understanding of what real luxury was. But Ibrahim's calm demeanor, his unwillingness to argue, left Victor feeling unsettled. Victor tried to laugh it off, but there was a faint edge to his voice. "Nice, you know. You sound like one of those people who's always looking for deeper meaning in everything," he said, almost mocking Ibrahim's calm philosophy. "But real life, it's not that simple." Ibrahim didn't respond immediately. He simply turned his head slightly to look at Victor, his expression still soft, his gaze steady and unwavering. He took another sip of water, his eyes never leaving Victor's. The silence between them seemed to stretch, and as Ibrahim turned his gaze back to the window, it became clear that the conversation, at least for him, was over. But Victor wasn't done. He shifted in his seat, determined to make his point, as if to prove that the world Ibrahim lived in, with its simplicity and tranquility, was naive at best. "Yeah, Victor said, leaning slightly toward Ibrahim, with an almost smug look on his face. "Life is like this," he said, gesturing vaguely with his glass of champagne. "You work hard, earn your place, and then you get to enjoy it. People like me, we're here because we've worked for it. But some people," he continued, his voice now full of disdain, "some people just don't belong. It's all about luck, not hard work." Ibrahim, still holding his water, listened quietly, never once looking away from the window. When Victor finished his statement, Ibrahim paused for a long moment. The passengers around them were beginning to notice the tension building between the two men. The subtle shift in the air was palpable. Finally, Ibrahim spoke, his voice low but firm. "Luck or hard work," he said, his gaze still fixed ahead. We all end up in the same place when the flight lands, don't we?" Victor's face tightened. He hadn't expected that response. It wasn't the kind of comeback he had prepared for. He had been expecting Ibrahim to get defensive, to argue back. But instead, Ibrahim had turned his words back on him, without a hint of aggression, yet with undeniable power. The other passengers, who had been quietly observing the interaction, began to exchange glances. Some seemed to agree with Ibrahim's calm response, while others still seemed to side with Victor, who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the lack of respect he was receiving. But it was clear now that the passengers had shifted their attention toward the two men. Victor, struggling to regain control, tried another approach. He said, his voice tight with frustration, "Life's not just about showing up and getting lucky. Some people are born into this." He gestured around the lavish first-class cabin, "because they know how to seize it. They understand the value of what's offered. People like you," he said, his voice sharp, "seem to think it's all just about being happy with less." Ibrahim, without looking at Victor, simply responded, "True success doesn't need to be shouted about. It speaks for itself." Victor frowned, still unwilling to let go of his need to be right. his need to hold power in this interaction. Yeah, I guess, he muttered, but not everyone gets that. Ibrahim's calm smile returned, but there was a quiet strength in it. Maybe, he said, but I think what matters more is how we treat others. Victor's mouth twisted into a bitter smile, but it lacked confidence now. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. He had expected to put Ibrahim in his place, but instead, he had found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about success, power, and status. The flight continued, and with each passing minute, the tension between Victor and Ibrahim seemed to grow. It wasn't loud or overt, but it was palpable. Ibrahim, with his quiet demeanor and unwavering calm, had become a puzzle to Victor. A man who refused to engage in the verbal battle Victor was trying so hard to spark. Meanwhile, Victor, ever the master of control, was beginning to feel his grip slipping. The flight attendants continued their rounds, serving drinks and snacks to first-class passengers. As the cart rolled past Ibrahim's seat again, Victor couldn't help himself. He felt the need to reassert his superiority, to remind everyone around him that he belonged here, that he had earned this place. He glanced over at Ibrahim, who was gazing out the window, lost in his thoughts. Victor took another sip of his champagne, and in a voice loud enough to catch the attention of a few nearby passengers, he said, "You know, people like us, we work hard to be where we are." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air for a moment. "But some people," he continued, looking at Ibrahim with a cold smile, "some people are only here because of luck. You know, those who get the ticket because of circumstance, not because they deserve it." Ibrahim, without turning his head, placed his water bottle on the seat tray, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't react to Victor's words right away, as if the conversation were insignificant. But Victor wasn't done. He was determined to provoke a reaction. "I don't know if you've ever considered it," Victor went on, leaning in slightly, "but some things in life are just meant for certain people. For others, well, they never really fit in. First class, for example," he said with a hint of mockery in his voice. "It's not just about having a seat in the front. It's about who you are, how you carry yourself. And you just don't seem to get it." The words stung, but Ibrahim's face remained unchanged. He took a deep breath and finally turned to face Victor, his eyes calm yet firm. There was no anger in his gaze, just a quiet strength that spoke volumes. "Maybe the best is different for everyone," Ibrahim said, his voice low but clear. "What some people think is the best may not be the same for someone else. You don't know me, Victor. You don't know what I've worked for or how I live." Victor's smug smile faltered. He wasn't used to being spoken to this way, especially by someone he had so easily judged and dismissed. Ibrahim wasn't backing down. He wasn't angry, but his words were penetrating, and for the first time, Victor felt unsure. "You think you understand success, don't you?" Ibrahim continued, his tone gentle but firm. "Success isn't about what others see, what they admire in you. It's about how you treat those around you, how you live your life with integrity, and how you lift others up. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Victor. Not to me, not to anyone." Victor's expression shifted slightly, the bravado fading from his face. He was taken aback by Ibrahim's words, not expecting them to hit so hard. Ibrahim had turned the conversation into something more than just a battle of egos. It had become a lesson in character, and Victor was beginning to feel the weight of it. "Success doesn't need to be shown off," Ibrahim added. "It's not about impressing others. It's about doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. True success comes from within, not from what people see on the outside." Victor was silent now, the words sinking in. He had been so focused on making himself known, on proving his worth, that he hadn't stopped to consider what it really meant to be successful. In his world, success had always been about status, about winning, about showing off. But Ibrahim was telling him something different, something that, for the first time, seemed more real than anything Victor had ever known. Victor leaned forward, trying to regain some control. "You know," he said sharply, "life isn't all about sitting back and meditating. Some of us are here because we've earned it. We worked hard for this." Ibrahim didn't respond right away, his gaze still focused out the window. His silence was the perfect contrast to Victor's growing frustration. When the flight attendants passed by, Ibrahim asked for another bottle of water, a simple request that spoke volumes to those watching. Victor, irritated, decided to provoke him further. "You might be sitting in first class," he began, "but not everyone belongs here. This space is for people who've earned it, who've made something of themselves." Ibrahim turned toward him, his gaze steady. "Maybe," he said slowly. but we all get the same seat when the plane lands. Victor's jaw tightened, unable to break Ibrahim's calm. For the first time, he realized that his usual tactics weren't working. Now, you're right, he muttered, trying to regain his footing. But what matters is how we get there, isn't it? How hard we work for it. Ibrahim smiled gently. It's not about letting life pass you by, he said. It's about choosing how you live it. There's no point in exhausting yourself if you forget what really matters. Victor, taken aback, couldn't argue. Ibrahim's words had struck a chord. The quiet man beside him, whom he had once judged, was teaching him something deeper about success and life. For the first time, Victor was unsure of himself. Ibrahim leaned forward, his voice firm but kind. Success isn't about what you accumulate. It's how you treat others, how you lift them up. The world doesn't need more people who think they're better than others. It needs people who lead with kindness and respect. Victor fell silent, unable to respond. He had spent his life proving himself to others, accumulating wealth and status. But now he saw that it wasn't about what you had or showed off. It was about how you treated those around you. The rest of the flight was heavy with silence. Ibrahim sat calmly while Victor fidgeted, his mind spinning. The realization that Ibrahim's quiet strength had completely unsettled him left Victor feeling exposed. He no longer felt like he was in control, and the tension he had caused began to shift onto him. The passengers around them, who had been watching quietly, now looked at Victor with disapproving glances. As the plane began to descend, Ibrahim's name was called over the intercom. Mr. Traore, your connection in Paris is confirmed. The captain sends his best regards. Victor froze. He hadn't known Ibrahim's identity until now, but hearing the name sent a ripple through the cabin. People around them started to recognize Ibrahim, their glances turning to him with a new sense of respect. Victor felt a wave of humiliation wash over him. He had challenged a man he thought was beneath him, only to realize that Ibrahim was someone far more influential and impactful than he had ever imagined. Ibrahim, however, didn't make a spectacle of the moment. He nodded politely and thanked the flight attendant, his demeanor unchanged. I didn't think it was necessary, he said to Victor, but I hope you'll understand, Victor. It's not who we are that matters. It's how we treat others. Victor, his face flushed with realization, nodded slowly. He had been humiliated, yes, but in that moment, he felt something new, a small seed of change taking root. Maybe he could learn to be different, to understand that true success wasn't about dominance or wealth, but about kindness, humility, and respect. As the plane landed, Victor stayed seated for a moment, reflecting on the encounter. Ibrahim, with his quiet strength, had shown him a lesson that would stay with him forever. As Ibrahim walked away, smiling and greeting his fans, Victor watched him go, feeling the weight of his words echo inside him. For the first time in his life, Victor realized that true power came not from showing off what you had, but from how you lived your life. It was a lesson that had struck deeper than any victory or achievement ever could.